He called her infertile and left her. She returned with twins and owns his company now. Life-changing story. Welcome, beautiful souls. Whether you're a new light joining our circle or a cherished returning spirit, we embrace you with open hearts. Share your name and join us on this journey of love and healing. Every story here is crafted with divine intention. Take a deep breath and let your heart's wisdom guide you home. The crisp October air swirled through Westbrook University's historic campus, carrying with it the sweet scent of fallen leaves and new beginnings. The year was 2018, and the ivy-covered building stood sentinel over countless stories of love and ambition, but none quite like the tale that was about to unfold. Tristan Stubbs hurried across the cobblestone path, his leather messenger bag thumping against his hip with each purposeful stride. At 21, he cut an impressive figure, tall and athletic, with carefully styled dark hair and azure eyes that seemed to hold both mischief and determination. His charcoal cashmere sweater and tailored slacks spoke of old money and Connecticut summers. But there was something in his walk that suggested he was determined to make his own way in the world. He was running late for Professor Harrison Blake's Advanced Business Administration seminar, a class that could make or break his chances at landing his dream internship at Bartlett Industries. The autumn sun caught the face of the antique watch on his wrist, a graduation present from his grandfather, reminding him he had exactly 3 minutes to cross the sprawling campus quad. The massive library doors burst open just as he passed, and in that moment, fate decided to play its hand. Thais Rossington emerged from the building like a ray of sunshine breaking through storm clouds. Her arms were laden with books, and her attention was completely absorbed in what appeared to be an advanced economics text. She walked with the natural grace of someone who inhabited their body with complete confidence, despite being clearly lost in theoretical frameworks and statistical analyses. Their collision was as inevitable as gravity. Books went flying, papers scattered like autumn leaves, joining their real counterparts in a swirling dance around them. Tristan's laptop bag slipped from his shoulder, and both of them reached instinctively to break their fall. His hand landed on her waist, steadying her, while hers gripped his forearm with surprising strength. "I'm so sorry," they said in perfect unison, and then their eyes met. Tristan found himself staring into eyes that reminded him of rich bourbon and warm honey, flecked with gold that caught the morning light. Thais's natural curls formed a perfect halo around her face. Some strands escaped from the elegant twist she'd attempted to contain them in. Her yellow sundress seemed to capture sunlight itself, making her glow against the backdrop of red and orange leaves. "I was reading while walking," Thais admitted, tucking a rebellious strand of hair behind her ear. Her voice carried traces of New Orleans, warm and melodic. "Terrible habit. My grandmother always says I'll end up in the Mississippi one day if I don't watch where I'm going." She laughed, and the sound seemed to make the autumn day warmer. "Well, this isn't the Mississippi," Tristan found himself saying, surprising himself with his own boldness, "but I'd say we've made quite a splash anyway." He mentally cringed at the terrible pun, but Thais's laugh grew deeper, more genuine. They both reached for the same book, Behavioral Economics in the Modern Market, their fingers brushing against each other. A spark of electricity seemed to pass between them, and they both pulled back slightly, startled by the intensity of that simple touch. "You're in Professor Reina Martinez's Advanced Economic Theory class?" Tristan asked, noticing the distinctive red bookmark peeking out from the pages. It was one of the most challenging courses offered at Westbrook, known for making or breaking academic careers. Thais nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Let me guess. You're surprised to see someone from the economics department with their head in the clouds instead of buried in spreadsheets." "No," Tristan replied honestly, helping her gather the rest of her books. I'm surprised to find someone else who color-codes their notes with the same obsessive system I use." He pointed to the various highlighted sections visible through the papers they were collecting. She looked down at her notes, then at his visible notebook, and her face lit up with recognition. Purple for theoretical frameworks, green for practical applications, yellow for critical analysis points, she asked, her eyes sparkling, and orange for potential exam questions. They finished together, then burst out laughing. A bell tolled in the distance, making Tristan jump. "Oh, God! Professor Blake is going to kill me." He groaned, quickly stuffing his papers back into his bag. "Blake?" "Harrison Blake," Thais asked, raising an eyebrow. "Don't worry about him. He always spends the first 15 minutes of class talking about his latest sailing adventure. You won't miss anything important." "How do you know that?" "I'm his teaching assistant for the freshman business courses," she explained, gathering the last of her books. "I've heard about the regatta of 95 at least 20 times this semester alone." Tristan stood, offering his hand to help her up. She took it, and again that spark seemed to pass between them. This time, neither pulled away immediately. "I'm Tristan Stubbs," he said, still holding her hand. "Thais Rossington," she replied, her smile warming him more than his sweater ever could. "Thais," he repeated, loving how her name felt on his tongue. "Would you maybe want to grab coffee after my class? I promise to watch where I'm going this time." She pretended to consider it, tilting her head slightly. "Well, I suppose it would be safer for the general public if at least one of us was paying attention." Her smile turned playful. "There's a little cafe just off campus, the Copper Bean. They make the best beignets this side of Louisiana. Meet me there at 11. "It's a date," Tristan said, then quickly added, "I mean, if you want it to be." Thais shouldered her bag, her eyes twinkling. "I guess we'll find out at 11, won't we?" As she walked away, Tristan stood rooted to the spot, watching her yellow dress disappear around the corner of the library. He was now definitely late for Professor Blake's class, but somehow that didn't seem to matter anymore. The autumn air felt electric with possibility, and something told him his life had just changed irrevocably. Little did he know just how right he was, or how this chance encounter would set in motion events that would shape not only his future, but the futures of so many others. The universe had just dealt its first card in a game of love, betrayal, and ultimately redemption that would span years and touch countless lives. As he finally turned toward his class, the morning sun caught something golden on the ground. It was a small pin in the shape of a fleur-de-lis, presumably fallen from Thais's bag during their collision. Tristan picked it up, smiling as he slipped it into his pocket. He now had the perfect excuse to make sure she wouldn't disappear after coffee. The ancient bell tower chimed again, its deep tones echoing across the campus. Leaves continued their elegant dance around him, and somewhere in the distance a group of students burst into laughter. It was just another autumn morning at Westbrook University, but for Tristan Stubbs and Thais Rossington, it was the beginning of everything. Professor Blake would indeed spend the first 15 minutes of class regaling his students with tales of his sailing adventures, but Tristan barely heard a word. His mind was filled with warm brown eyes and the lilting traces of a New Orleans accent, and his notebook page remained blank save for one thing: the time, 11 o'clock, circled multiple times in purple ink. Sometimes the biggest moments in our lives arrive dressed as ordinary days, and the most important chapters of our stories begin with something as simple as a collision outside a library. For Tristan and Thais, this was such a moment, pure, precious, and perfect in its simplicity. Neither could have predicted how their story would unfold, the heights it would reach, or the depths it would plumb. But then again, the best stories rarely come with warnings, and the greatest loves often begin with a simple hello and a scattered pile of books on an autumn morning. Chapter 2. The Courtship, When Hearts Learn to Dance. Their first coffee date at the Copper Bean stretched from 11 in the morning until the cafe's closing time at 9. Thais introduced Tristan to authentic beignets, laughing as powdered sugar dusted his expensive sweater. He didn't mind. He was too captivated by how she used coffee stirrers and sugar packets to explain market equilibrium theories. "You see," she said, arranging the packets in a perfect supply and demand curve, "economics isn't just about numbers. It's about understanding human behavior, predicting patterns, reading signs." Her fingers traced the invisible line between the curves. "Sometimes the most important signals are the ones we almost miss." Tristan watched her hands move, remembering the fleur-de-lis pin in his pocket. He'd meant to return it immediately, but something made him wait. "Like signs that tell you when something important is about to happen?" he asked. She looked up, catching his gaze. "Exactly like that." The weeks that followed wove themselves into a tapestry of shared moments and growing connection. Their study sessions in the library's West Wing became legendary among their classmates. Thais would bring her grandmother's secret recipe coffee in a thermos, and Tristan would smuggle in still-warm cookies from the campus bakery where his friend Hudson worked. It wasn't just their academic interests that aligned. They discovered a shared love for jazz. Thais had grown up with it in New Orleans, while Tristan had discovered it through his grandfather's vinyl collection. Every Thursday night, they'd sneak into the music building's practice rooms. Thais would play piano, her fingers dancing across the keys as she taught Tristan about Miles Davis and John Coltrane. "Music and economics aren't so different," she explained one evening, her hands moving through a complicated progression. "Both are about patterns, rhythm, the push and pull of opposing forces finding harmony." Tristan's friends from the business program were surprised by the match at first. Kingston Reynolds, his roommate since freshman year, pulled him aside after a week of watching him disappear every evening. "Man, you're crossing some interesting social lines here," Kingston said, trying to sound casual. "Your father's country club friends might have something to say about it." Tristan's response was immediate and firm. "Then they can say it to my face, and they can explain exactly what they mean by social lines." His voice carried an edge that made Kingston step back, hands raised in surrender. "Hey, I'm just looking out for you. But for what it's worth," Kingston added, grinning, "I've never seen you this happy." The real test came during Parents' Weekend in November. Tristan's parents, Richard and Evelyn Stubbs, arrived in their Mercedes, bringing with them the weight of old money expectations. Thais's mother, Dr. Amara Rossington, flew in from New Orleans, a brilliant neurosurgeon who'd raised Thais alone after her father's death. They arranged a dinner at L'Artisan, the most exclusive restaurant near campus. The tension was palpable as they were seated, Evelyn Stubbs's eyes taking in Thais's natural hair and elegant but clearly not designer dress with poorly concealed judgment. But then Thais began to speak. She discussed economic theories with Richard, debated neuroscience with Amara, and somehow managed to engage Evelyn in a conversation about traditional New Orleans architecture that left the older woman genuinely impressed. By dessert, even Evelyn had thawed, asking Thais for her grandmother's gumbo recipe. Later that night, walking back across campus under a star-filled sky, Thais turned to Tristan. "Your mother asked me if I learned about wine pairings at Cotillion," she said, trying not to laugh. "I'm so sorry," Tristan began, but she stopped him. "Don't be. I told her I learned about wine while studying abroad in France, researching the economic impact of traditional vintners versus modern mass production methods." Her smile was mischievous. "I didn't mention that their search was mostly drinking wine with my host family and learning to curse in French." It was moments like these that made Tristan fall deeper in love. Thais had a way of navigating difficult situations with grace and wit, never compromising who she was, but also never seeking conflict. She was brilliant without being arrogant, confident without being harsh. Their relationship wasn't without its challenges. They came from different worlds, and sometimes those differences created unexpected hurdles. Thais noticed how some of Tristan's wealthy acquaintances would speak differently around her, their politeness carrying undertones of condescension. Tristan struggled to understand why Thais was sometimes guarded in certain social situations, until she explained the exhaustion of constantly having to prove herself in spaces that weren't designed for her. But they faced these challenges together, learning from each other, growing stronger. Tristan started attending meetings of the Black Student Union with Thais, genuinely wanting to understand her experience. She helped him see the world through different eyes, while he learned to use his privilege to create space for important conversations among his peers. The turning point in their relationship came during winter break. Thais invited Tristan to New Orleans to meet her grandmother, Magnolia Rossington, a legendary figure in the French Quarter, known as much for her activism in the civil rights movement as for her famous restaurant. In Magnolia's warm kitchen, as she taught Tristan how to make proper roux for gumbo, she told stories of love across boundaries in times when such love carried real danger. But real love, she said, stirring the pot with practiced grace, real love doesn't see boundaries, it sees souls. That evening, in the restaurant's empty dining room, as the smell of spices hung in the air and distant jazz floated in from Frenchman Street, Tristan finally gave Thais her fleur-de-lis pin back. "I've been carrying this since the day we met," he confessed, holding out the small golden pin. "I kept waiting for the perfect moment." Thais took the pin, tears welling in her eyes. "It was my father's," she whispered, "the last thing he gave me before he died. I thought I'd lost it forever." They held each other as she cried, and something shifted between them. Their love deepened, rooted now in understanding and trust that went beyond the surface. Spring semester saw them becoming the power couple of Westbrook University. Together, they created a mentorship program pairing business and economic students with underprivileged high school students interested in finance. Their initiative caught the attention of several major companies, including Bartlett Industries, which offered to sponsor their program. As graduation approached, their friends watched their relationship with a mixture of envy and admiration. Madison Brooks, Thais's roommate, perhaps said it best during a late-night study session. "You two aren't just dating," she observed, watching them work seamlessly together on a presentation. "You're building something bigger than yourselves." Neither Tristan nor Thais could know then how prophetic those words would prove to be, or how the foundation they were building would be tested in ways they couldn't imagine. But for now, they were simply two young people in love, their future stretching before them like an endless horizon filled with possibility. As winter melted into spring, and spring bloomed toward graduation, their love story seemed to be following a perfect script. Tristan had already secured a position at Bartlett Industries, and Thais was fielding offers from top economic think tanks. They spent their evenings planning their future, dreaming of a life that would combine their ambitions with their love. Little did they know that life rarely follows scripts, and that the greatest tests of love often come disguised as triumph. But for now, they were in that golden moment of pure possibility, their love as bright and promising as the future they planned together. And in her kitchen in New Orleans, Magnolia Rossington lit a candle and said a prayer for them both, her aged hands still strong as they stirred another pot of gumbo, her wisdom seeing both the beauty and the challenges that lay ahead for her granddaughter and the young man who loved her. Chapter 3. A Proposal to Remember. The morning of graduation dawned with the kind of perfect clarity that seemed almost orchestrated. Purple and gold balloons, Westbrook University's colors, dotted the campus like exotic flowers, swaying gently in the May breeze. The iconic Founder's Fountain sparkled in the early morning light, its waters dancing to a rhythm all their own. Tristan stood in front of his mirror in the apartment he shared with Kingston, adjusting his tie for the 20th time. The small velvet box in his pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "You're going to wear out that tie if you keep fiddling with it," Kingston remarked, leaning against the doorframe. He was already dressed in his graduation robes, the honours cords draped elegantly around his neck. "The ring isn't going to disappear if you stop touching your pocket every 5 seconds. The ring. Tristan's hand instinctively moved to his pocket again. Inside was his grandmother's vintage diamond ring, reset by New Orleans' finest jeweler under Magnolia Rossington's careful supervision. The central diamond was now surrounded by tiny sapphires, Thais's birthstone, arranged in a pattern that mimicked the fleur-de-lis. What if she says no? Tristan's voice was barely a whisper. Kingston actually laughed. "Man, that woman looks at you like you hung the moon. Plus, she's literally the smartest person we know. She's not about to make the dumbest decision of her life by saying no." A knock at the door interrupted them. Madison Brooks burst in, still in curlers, her graduation robe thrown hastily over her shoulders. "Is everything ready? Please tell me everything's ready." She'd been instrumental in helping Tristan plan this day, coordinating with what felt like half the graduating class to make sure everything would be perfect. Even Professor Blake had been recruited, agreeing to make a special announcement that would bring Thais to exactly the right spot, at exactly the right moment. "Everything's set," Tristan confirmed, though his hands were shaking slightly. "The musicians. The entire jazz ensemble is in position," Madison assured him. "They've been practicing What a Wonderful World for weeks, Thais's grandmother's favorite version." Across campus, in her dorm room, Thais was also preparing for graduation, unaware of the elaborate plan unfolding around her. Her mother and grandmother had arrived the night before, helping her press her graduation robe and arrange her natural curls into an elegant style that would work under her cap. "Something feels different about today," Thais said, watching her grandmother arrange flowers they'd brought from New Orleans, magnolias and jasmine, filling the room with the scent of home. Magnolia smiled knowingly, her eyes twinkling. "Different days bring different blessings, child. Some days just bring more than others." Dr. Amara Rossington watched her daughter, her heart full. "Your father would be so proud," she said softly, touching the fleur-de-lis pin that was fastened to Thais's graduation stole. "He always said you were destined for greatness." The graduation ceremony itself was a blur of speeches, names, and the rhythmic flow of students crossing the stage. Tristan, seated with the business school graduates, could barely focus. His eyes kept finding Thais among the economics graduates, her smile radiant as she received her diploma with highest honors. Finally, as the ceremony concluded and the graduates began to disperse, Professor Blake's voice came over the speakers. "Would the recipients of the Westbrook Excellence in Economics Award please gather at Founder's Fountain for a special photograph?" Thais, one of only 3 recipients, made her way through the crowd. She was puzzled to find no photographer waiting, but instead, the first notes of What a Wonderful World began to play. The jazz ensemble, hidden behind the fountain's massive structure, played softly as Tristan appeared. He looked nervous but determined as he walked toward her. The crowd around them began to notice, growing quiet. Phones appeared, recording what was about to happen. "Thais Rossington," Tristan began, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent courtyard. "4 years ago, I was running late to class when my life literally collided with yours. I dropped everything that day, my books, my schedule, and most importantly, my heart." He reached for her hand, and she realized he was shaking slightly. In the crowd, she could see their families watching, her mother crying openly, her grandmother beaming, even Tristan's parents looking genuinely moved. "You've taught me more than any class ever could," he continued. You taught me about love that crosses boundaries, about courage that defies expectations, about dreams that know no limits. You've made these past 4 years the best of my life. Dropping to one knee, he pulled out the velvet box. The ring caught the sunlight, the sapphires creating tiny blue flames around the central diamond. Thais gasped when she saw the fleur-de-lis pattern. Will you make every year after this just as amazing? Will you marry me? The silence stretched for a heartbeat. 2. Then Thais, tears streaming down her face, pulled Tristan to his feet. Yes, she said, her voice carrying across the courtyard. 1,000 times yes. The crowd erupted. The jazz ensemble launched into a more upbeat version of the song. Purple and gold balloons were released into the sky, creating a canopy of color above them as Tristan slipped the ring onto her finger. Madison was the first to reach them, hugging them both while somehow managing to keep filming. Kingston appeared with champagne that seemed to materialize from nowhere. Their families converged, Magnolia pulling both of them into a tight embrace, Dr. Rossington wiping tears from her eyes, even Evelyn Stubbs looking genuinely emotional. I helped design the ring, Magnolia whispered to Thais. Had to make sure this Connecticut boy did right by my grandbaby. As their friends and families celebrated around them, Tristan held Thais close. I was so nervous, he admitted quietly. She touched the fleur-de-lis pattern on her ring. You remembered how much this symbol means to me. I remember everything about you, he said, and I want to spend the rest of my life learning more. Above them, the balloons danced in the spring breeze, purple and gold merging against the blue sky. The jazz band had switched to La Vie en Rose, and couples began dancing on the lawn. It was a moment of pure joy, untouched by the shadows that would later try to darken their love. Professor Blake, watching from the sidelines, raised his glass in a quiet toast. Now that, he said to no one in particular, is how you start a new chapter. Later that evening, at the celebration dinner that merged seamlessly into a surprise engagement party, Magnolia Rossington pulled Tristan aside. Love like this comes with responsibility, she told him, her eyes serious despite her smile. You're not just marrying my granddaughter, you're marrying her dreams, her heritage, her future. You remember that? Tristan nodded solemnly. I promise to be worthy of her, he said. Magnolia patted his cheek. See that you are, child. See that you are. As the night wound down, Thais and Tristan slipped away from the party, finding their way to their spot by the fountain. The water sparkled under the stars, and the last strains of jazz floated on the warm air. Are you happy? Tristan asked, watching the ring sparkle on her finger. Thais leaned into him, her head fitting perfectly under his chin. I'm more than happy, she said. I'm home. Neither of them could know then how that word, home, would come to mean so many different things in the years ahead. But in that moment, under the stars, with the promise of tomorrow stretching endlessly before them, they were exactly where they were meant to be. The fountain continued its eternal dance, witness to another love story written in its waters. And somewhere in the distance, a jazz saxophone played one last sweet note, sending their promise of forever into the night sky. Chapter 4. The Wedding of Dreams, where two worlds become one. St. Augustine's Cathedral in New Orleans' French Quarter stood resplendent in the golden light of a Louisiana sunset. The historic church, where Thais's grandmother had once sung in the choir during the civil rights movement, was transformed into a vision that merged two worlds into one perfect harmony. Magnolia's influence was evident in the decorations, crystal vases filled with magnolias and white roses, their perfume mixing with the lingering scent of incense. Delicate strands of lights twinkled like stars against the soaring Gothic arches, while purple and gold ribbons, a nod to their Westbrook beginnings, draped elegantly across the pews. In the bridal suite, Thais sat before an antique mirror as her grandmother's practiced hands placed the final touches on her hair. The natural curls had been arranged in an elegant updo, with tiny pearl pins catching the light. Her wedding dress, a masterpiece of French lace and silk, told its own story of cultural fusion, designed by a black fashion designer in New Orleans, but finished with vintage buttons from Tristan's great-grandmother's collection. "Something old," Magnolia said softly, fastening the fleur-de-lis pin to the inside of Thais's dress near her heart. "Your daddy's love watching over you." "Something new," Dr. Amara added, clasping a pearl necklace around her daughter's neck, each pearl representing a generation of strong women in their family. "Something borrowed?" Madison Brooks, the maid of honor, presented a delicate lace handkerchief that had been in her family for generations. "And something blue," Thais finished, touching the sapphires in her engagement ring, smiling at her reflection. Meanwhile, in the groom's chamber, Tristan adjusted his bow tie for the 100th time. His best man, Kingston Reynolds, watched with amusement while sipping bourbon from a crystal flask. "You know," Kingston mused, "when we were freshmen and you told me you'd found the love of your life after literally running into her, I thought you'd lost your mind." He passed the flask to Tristan. "I've never been happier to be wrong." Richard Stubbs, Tristan's father, entered the room looking uncharacteristically emotional. "Son," he said, his voice rough with feeling, "I owe you an apology." Tristan turned, surprised. His father had always been a man of few words, especially when it came to emotions. "When you first told us about Thais, I had reservations." Richard cleared his throat. "I was wrong. She's not just good enough for this family, she makes this family better." He pulled out an envelope. "Your mother and I want you to have this." Inside was the deed to a historic brownstone in the city's most prestigious neighborhood, not far from where Tristan would be working at Bartlett Industries. "It's your wedding gift," Richard explained. "A home worthy of the family you'll build." The ceremony itself was a masterpiece of cultural celebration. As guests filled the cathedral, a unique musical prelude began, a string quartet playing classical pieces that smoothly transitioned into jazz arrangements. The effect was magical, much like the couple themselves. When the doors opened for Thais's entrance, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. She floated down the aisle on her mother's arm, while Magnolia's voice filled the cathedral with amazing grace, every note carrying decades of history and hope. The minister, Reverend James Carter, had worked with the couple to create a ceremony that honored both their backgrounds while celebrating their shared future. Traditional vows were complemented by personal promises they'd written themselves. "Thais," Tristan's voice rang clear and strong, "I promise to love you across all boundaries, to support your dreams as if they were my own, and to build a future where our differences make us stronger. You are my North Star, my home, my everything." Thais's vows were equally moving. "Tristan, you saw me for who I am, not what I represent. I promise to love you with the same openness, to face every challenge by your side, and to never let go of the magic that brought us together. You are my miracle, my partner, my heart." The reception was held in the courtyard of Magnolia's famous restaurant, now expanded to include the adjacent buildings. String lights turned the space into a fairy tale, while jazz music floated through the warm New Orleans night. The menu was a triumph of fusion cuisine, classic Creole dishes served alongside Connecticut coastal favorites. Magnolia had personally supervised every detail, ensuring that each bite told a story of two cultures coming together. Xavier Bartlett, Tristan's new boss and an unexpected addition to the guest list, raised an eyebrow appreciatively at the sophisticated blend of traditions. "You've married well," he commented to Tristan during the reception. "A woman who can bridge worlds like this is a rare find." Madison's maid of honor speech brought both laughter and tears. "I've watched these two grow from a chance collision into something extraordinary," she said, raising her champagne glass. "Thais and Tristan don't just love each other. They make everyone around them believe in love. They prove that when two people are meant to be together, no boundary is too wide to cross, no obstacle too high to overcome." The night's most touching moment came during the father-daughter dance. Instead of skipping the tradition, Magnolia had arranged for a special tribute. As "What a Wonderful World" began to play, a montage of photos showed Thais with her father from her childhood, ending with her graduation proposal. Then one by one, the important men in her life took turns dancing with her, her uncle, her grandfather, and finally Tristan, each step healing old wounds and celebrating new beginnings. As the evening wound down, Magnolia gathered everyone for a traditional second-line parade through the French Quarter. Led by a brass band, the wedding party danced through the historic streets, tourists and locals alike joining in the celebration. Thais and Tristan twirled under their decorated umbrellas, their joy infectious. The night ended back in the courtyard, where Magnolia had one final surprise. She presented them with a small, ornate box. "This," she said, her voice rich with emotion, "is filled with letters from both your families, hopes, dreams, and wisdom for your journey together. Read them on your anniversaries, one each year, and remember that love like yours is built on the foundations of all who came before." As their guests departed, Thais and Tristan shared one last dance under the New Orleans stars. The jazz band played softly. The flowers released their final breath of fragrance, and two families, now one, watched with pride. "You know what your grandmother told me?" Tristan murmured as they swayed together. "What's that?" "She said, love like ours comes with responsibility. That I'm not just marrying you, but your dreams, your heritage, your future." Thais looked up at him, her eyes shining. "And are you ready for that responsibility?" Tristan kissed her softly. "For you? I'm ready for anything." Later that night, as they prepared to leave for their honeymoon, Magnolia pulled Thais aside for one last moment. "Remember, child," she whispered, "real love isn't just about the easy days. It's about choosing each other every day, especially when the choice is hard." Neither bride nor groom could know then how prophetic those words would prove to be. But on that magical New Orleans night, surrounded by love and music and possibilities, their future seemed as bright as the stars above the French Quarter, and their love as eternal as the city itself. As their car pulled away, cans rattling behind it, the last notes of jazz floating on the breeze, Magnolia watched them go, her heart full, but her eyes carrying a wisdom that had seen both love's triumph and its trials. She lit a candle in the church window, a traditional gesture of guidance for travelers, though whether it was for their honeymoon journey or the longer journey of life, only she knew for sure. The old cathedral bells tolled midnight, their sound carrying across the quarter, blessing this union of two souls, two families, two worlds, now and forever one. Chapter 5. Early Years of Bliss, the Calm Before the Storm. The historic brownstone on Beacon Hill Avenue seemed to breathe with possibility as Thais and Tristan crossed the threshold after their honeymoon. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, dancing across hardwood floors that had witnessed a century of stories. Their footsteps echoed in the empty rooms, each space waiting to be filled with their dreams. "I can't believe this is ours," Thais whispered, her hand trailing along the ornate banister. The architect in her marveled at the original crown molding, while the economist calculated the property's appreciation potential. "Your parents' wedding gift is overwhelming." Tristan wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Think of it as an investment in our future. Besides," he grinned, "wait until you see what Magnolia sent." In the kitchen, They found a massive box filled with New Orleans treasures, hand-painted dishes, family recipes yellowed with age, and a cast-iron pot that Magnolia swore was seasoned with 100 years of love. A note attached read, "A house becomes a home through the meals shared within its walls. Start your own traditions, but never forget your roots." Those first months were a symphony of joy. They threw themselves into making the brownstone their own, blending their styles in ways that reflected their unified vision. Thais's art collection, pieces from up-and-coming black artists she'd discovered in New Orleans, found homes alongside Tristan's family heirlooms. Their shared office became a testament to their ambitions, with double desks facing each other and a wall dedicated to their goals. Tristan's career at Bartlett Industries took off like a rocket. Xavier Bartlett took a special interest in his development, often inviting the young couple to corporate events. Thais would watch her husband command rooms with his natural charisma, pride swelling in her heart. "Your husband has a bright future," Xavier commented during one such event, his eyes sharp as he studied Thais's reaction. "He reminds me of myself at that age, hungry for success, willing to do whatever it takes." Thais couldn't quite place why those words sent a slight chill down her spine. Her own career flourished as well. Her economic research on sustainable urban development caught the attention of major think tanks, and she found herself traveling to conferences, presenting her findings to rapt audiences. Tristan always made sure to be in the front row when she spoke, his face beaming with pride. Their dinner parties became legendary in their social circle. Madison, who had also moved to the city to work for a major publishing house, loved to remind them of their college days. "Remember when we thought ramen with an egg was fancy dinner?" She laughed during one such evening, watching Thais plate a perfectly executed coq au vin. "Now look at you two, the power couple of Beacon Hill." Kingston, who had recently started his own tech startup, raised his glass. To perfect pairs, in business and in life. The nights were their favorite time. They would often sit in their bay window, sharing wine and dreams while watching the city lights twinkle. Thais would rest her head on Tristan's shoulder and they'd talk about everything and nothing. "Do you think we'll always be this happy?" she asked one such night, their second wedding anniversary approaching. "Happier," Tristan promised, kissing her temple. "We're just getting started." But life has a way of introducing change slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. It started with small things. Tristan working later hours, Thais traveling more for conferences. The moments they shared became slightly less frequent, though no less precious. The first real ripple came during a dinner with Tristan's parents. Evelyn Stubbs, ever the society matron, couldn't resist bringing up the subject of children. "The Hendersons' daughter just had twins," she mentioned, too casually. "And she's younger than you, Thais." Tristan felt his wife stiffen beside him, but said nothing, the silence stretching uncomfortably. Later that night, as they got ready for bed, Thais finally spoke. "We agreed to wait until we were both established in our careers." "I know," Tristan said, but something in his tone had changed. "I just thought maybe it's time to revisit that discussion." The conversation ended there, but something had shifted, subtle as a shadow, lengthening at dusk. Their third anniversary arrived in a burst of celebration. They opened the first letter from Magnolia's box, her wisdom flowing from the pages. "Marriage is like jazz. It's not just about playing the right notes, but about listening to each other's rhythm." That night, at the restaurant where they'd celebrated their engagement, Tristan watched his wife charm the sommelier with her knowledge of French wines. She was radiant, successful, entirely her own person. He loved her fiercely, but a small voice had begun whispering in his ear, a voice that sounded suspiciously like his mother's, asking about legacy, about time, about choices. Xavier's influence at work grew stronger. Tristan's promotions came faster than anyone expected, each one demanding more of his time, more of his focus. Success requires sacrifice, Xavier would say during their late-night strategy sessions. The question is, what are you willing to give up? The question lingered, unspoken but present, in the increasingly frequent empty chairs at their dinner table, in the cooling side of their bed when one worked late or travelled. They were still happy, still in love, still successful, but the first hairline cracks had begun to form, invisible to the naked eye, but there nonetheless. One morning, as Thais prepared for another conference, she found Tristan staring at a photo from their wedding day. "Missing me already," she teased, kissing his cheek. "Always," he smiled, but his eyes held something she couldn't quite read. "Maybe when you get back we could talk about our future." Thais paused in packing her briefcase. "Our future? I thought we were living it." "We are," he assured her quickly. "I just wonder if it's time to expand our definition of it." She promised they'd talk when she returned, but as her taxi pulled away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. The brownstone, their beautiful home, suddenly felt too big, too empty, too full of expectations she wasn't sure she was ready to meet. In his office at Bartlett Industries, Tristan stared out at the city skyline, Xavier's words echoing in his mind. A man needs a legacy, something more than just quarterly reports and stock options, something with his name on it. The sun set over their perfect life, casting long shadows across their carefully constructed world. Neither of them could see it yet, but the foundation they'd built with such love and care was about to be tested in ways they never imagined. Magnolia's second letter, still unopened in their anniversary box, held words they wouldn't read for months. "The truest test of love isn't in the vows we make, but in how we keep them when life asks us to choose between what we want and what we think we need." The city lights twinkled on, indifferent to the subtle shifts occurring behind perfectly restored brownstone walls, where a love story written in starlight and jazz notes faced its first real challenge. The weight of unspoken expectations. Chapter 6. The First Cracks. When Dreams Begin to Diverge. The first real change came wrapped in celebration. Tristan's promotion to Senior Vice President of Strategic Development at Bartlett Industries was announced at the company's annual gala. At 32, he was the youngest SVP in the company's history. Xavier Bartlett himself made the announcement, his hand heavy on Tristan's shoulder like a father proud of his son. Thais watched from their table, stunning in a midnight blue gown, as her husband accepted the position with his characteristic charm. She noted how the room responded to him, the admiring glances, the respectful nods, the way other executives' wives studied her with a mixture of envy and calculation. "You must be so proud," Evelyn Stubbs whispered, seated beside her. "Now might be the perfect time to focus on family." The pause was deliberate, the meaning clear. After all, dear, a man of his position needs a proper home life. The comment stung more than usual because earlier that day, Thais had received her own news. The Economic Policy Institute wanted her to lead a groundbreaking study on urban development and racial equity. It would mean extensive travel, speaking engagements, and a chance to make real change in communities like the one she'd grown up in. She hadn't told Tristan yet. Their brownstone, once a sanctuary of shared dreams, began to feel like a battlefield of unspoken expectations. The walls that had witnessed their early happiness now echoed with the silence of things left unsaid. It started with seemingly innocent changes. Tristan began attending fertility seminars during his lunch breaks. Pamphlets about family planning appeared on their kitchen counter. A spare room that had been designated as Thais's home office slowly transformed into a potential nursery in Tristan's conversations. "I was thinking," he said one morning over coffee, "maybe we could paint this room yellow. It's gender neutral, and the morning light is perfect. Thais stared into her coffee cup, her reflection fragmented in the dark liquid. "That's my writing room, Tristan." We agreed. "You're barely here to use it anymore," he replied, an edge creeping into his voice. "Between your conferences and research." "My career matters too," she cut in, sharper than intended. The silence that followed was deafening. Madison noticed the change during their monthly dinner dates. "You seem distant," she observed as they shared dessert at their favorite cafe. "Both of you do." Thais traced patterns in the condensation on her water glass. "We want different things right now. Or maybe we want the same things, just on different timelines." "Have you told him about the research position? Every time I try, he starts talking about legacy and family planning." Thais's voice cracked slightly. "Yesterday, I found prenatal vitamin samples in our bathroom cabinet." The pressure mounted quietly but persistently. At every corporate function, wives would corner Thais with stories about their perfect children, their fulfilled lives as mothers. Even Kingston, during a rare guys' night out, planted seeds in Tristan's mind. "Man, having kids changed everything for me," he said, showing off pictures of his newborn daughter. "Makes all the corporate ladder climbing mean something, you know." The breaking point came during a routine medical checkup. Tristan had insisted on accompanying Thais, something he'd never done before. The doctor, Dr. Isabella, picked up on the tension immediately. "So, are we thinking about family planning?" she asked diplomatically. Before Thais could respond, Tristan jumped in. "Actually, we've been trying for a while now. I was hoping we could run some fertility tests." Thais froze. "We haven't been trying," she corrected, her voice ice-cold. "And I'm on birth control." The drive home was silent. It wasn't until they reached their bedroom that the storm broke. "Birth control?" Tristan's voice was quiet but charged with emotion. "Were you ever going to tell me? Were you ever going to ask what I wanted?" Thais countered. "Or did you just assume that because you got a big promotion, I'd be ready to give up everything I've worked for?" "Give up?" "Thais, I'm talking about starting a family, not ending your life." "No, you're talking about your timeline, your needs, your vision of what our life should be. When did you stop seeing me as your partner and start seeing me as an obstacle to your perfect life plan?" The words hung in the air like shattered glass. Tristan ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd grown to know well. "I see you," he said finally. "I see a brilliant, beautiful woman who's afraid to want what I want." "Or maybe," Thais replied softly, "you're afraid that I want something different." That night, for the first time in their marriage, they slept on opposite sides of the bed, a gulf of unspoken words between them. The next morning, Thais found Tristan in the kitchen, staring at their wedding photo on the wall. She was about to speak when she noticed what was in his hands, a medical referral form from Dr. Gale. "What is that?" "Dr. Gale recommended a fertility specialist," he said without looking at her. "I made an appointment for next week." "You did what?" "We need to know if there are any issues we should be addressing," he continued as if he hadn't heard the warning in her voice. "Dr. Matthews is highly recommended." "Stop!" Thais's voice was barely a whisper. "Just stop!" Finally, he turned to face her. The man who looked back at her wasn't the boy who had collided with her outside the library, or even the proud groom from their wedding day. This was someone shaped by ambition and expectations, someone who had started making decisions without her. "I got offered a position," she said suddenly, "leading a major research initiative on urban development and racial equity. It's important work, Tristan, work that could help communities like the one I grew up in." His face darkened. "More travel, more time away, more chance to make a difference." She stepped closer, pleading. "Remember when you used to be proud of that?" "I am proud of you," he insisted. "But at some point we need to prioritize our family." I am your family, she said quietly. When did that stop being enough? The argument was interrupted by Tristan's phone. Xavier Bartlett needed him at the office. As he grabbed his keys, he paused at the door. I love you, he said, and she knew he meant it. But love isn't always enough, is it? At some point we have to grow up and think about the future. After he left, Thais went to their office and opened Magnolia's box of anniversary letters. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal on one that wasn't due to be opened for years. Child, remember that love is a choice we make every day. But the hardest choice isn't between loving and not loving. It's between loving someone as they are and loving who we want them to become. Be careful which one you choose. She pressed the letter to her heart and finally let the tears fall, wondering when their carefully constructed world had started to crack, and if they had the strength to piece it back together before it shattered completely. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the city, a fitting backdrop to the tempest brewing behind their perfectly restored brownstone facade. The first real cracks had appeared in their foundation, and like all cracks in beautiful things, they threatened to spread unless properly tended. But how do you tend to a crack in a dream? How do you mend a divide between two hearts that want different versions of forever? The answers would come, but not before their love would be tested in ways neither of them could imagine. For now the silence in their home grew louder, and the space between them wider, with each tick of the antique clock Magnolia had given them as a wedding gift, its steady rhythm a reminder that time waits for no one, not even hearts trying to beat in sync again. Chapter 7. The Descent. When love meets breaking point. The fertility clinic waiting room was painted in calming shades of sage and cream, with motivational posters showing smiling babies and happy families. For Thais, each image felt like an accusation. She sat rigidly in the plush chair, her hand cold in Tristan's warm grip as they waited for Dr. Victoria Matthews. This wasn't her choice, not really. But after weeks of escalating tension and Tristan's increasingly desperate pleas, she'd agreed to the consultation. Just to know our options, he'd said. The unspoken, to prove there's nothing wrong with me, hung heavy in her thoughts. Dr. Matthews was younger than expected, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Her office walls were covered with credentials from prestigious medical schools and family photos showing her own 3 children. Before we begin any testing, Dr. Matthews said, reviewing their files, I want to understand your goals as a couple. We want to start a family, Tristan began immediately. Eventually, Thais cut in, her voice tight. When the timing is right. Dr. Matthews' pen paused on her notepad. I'm sensing some disagreement about timing. The silence that followed was deafening. Thais just received a major career opportunity, Tristan explained, his tone carefully neutral. But we're not getting any younger, and with my new position at Bartlett Industries, my work matters, Thais interrupted. The research I'm doing could help thousands of families in underserved communities. I can't just... No one's asking you to give up your career entirely, Tristan countered, frustration bleeding into his voice. But timing is crucial for Mr. and Mrs. Stubbs, Dr. Matthews interjected gently. Perhaps we should discuss the medical aspects first. Mrs. Stubbs, when did you stop taking birth control? The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I haven't, Thais admitted quietly. Tristan's hand withdrew from hers as if burned. Still? Dr. Matthews observed their interaction carefully. I believe you might benefit from some counseling before we proceed with any medical interventions. I can recommend several excellent therapists who specialize in family planning discussions. We don't need therapy. Tristan stood abruptly. We need my wife to stop preventing us from having a family. The drive home was silent, but the brownstone erupted as soon as their door closed. How could you still be on birth control? Tristan's voice cracked with emotion. After all our discussions, All the specialists. Discussions? Thais laughed bitterly. You mean your monologues about what our life should look like? The appointments you schedule without asking me? The supplements you keep pushing on me? I'm trying to build our future. No, you're trying to force your vision of the future without considering mine. Thais's hands were shaking. You want to know why I'm still on birth control? Because I don't trust what you might do if I wasn't. The words hung in the air like poison. What's that supposed to mean? Tristan's voice was dangerously quiet. The mysterious supplements you keep bringing home, the ones that gave me food poisoning, did you ever actually tell me what was in those? Color drained from Tristan's face. They were natural fertility supplements. From a specialist Xavier recommended. A specialist who doesn't exist, Thais cut in. I checked, Tristan. That office address. It's a vacant lot. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Tristan sank onto their couch, head in his hands. Xavier said they were safe. He said his wife used them before. Before what, Tristan? Did you ever even ask? The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken accusations and devastating realizations. Upstairs, their bedroom held evidence of their diverging paths. Fertility books cluttered Tristan's nightstand, while Thais's side held research papers and conference schedules. The room they'd once shared in perfect harmony now felt like disputed territory. Later that night, unable to sleep, Thais found herself in their home office, staring at the vision board they'd created in happier times. Her fingers traced over the photos, their wedding day, their first home, their shared dreams. When had those dreams started pulling in opposite directions? Her phone buzzed with a text from Madison. How did it go? Before she could respond, another message appeared, this one from Dr. Matthew's office. Couples counseling availability this week. She deleted both messages. In his private study, Tristan sat at his desk, a glass of scotch untouched before him. His computer screen showed an email from Xavier. Sometimes tough decisions require tough measures. Your father built his legacy through sacrifice. What are you willing to sacrifice for yours? The words echoed in his mind as he pulled out a small bottle from his desk drawer. The supplements Xavier had given him. The label was worn, the ingredients list in a language he couldn't read. For the first time, doubt crept into his certainty. The next morning brought no resolution. Thais left early for a research presentation, her overnight bag packed for a 3-day conference. As she waited for her ride, Tristan appeared in the doorway. I would never hurt you, he said softly. You know that, right? She looked at him, really looked at him. The boy who had once crashed into her life with such joy was still there, somewhere behind the man shaped by ambition and expectation. I know you wouldn't mean to, she replied carefully, but sometimes we hurt people by trying to shape them into what we think they should be. Her car arrived before he could respond. That afternoon, in his office at Bartlett Industries, Tristan stared at the supplement bottle on his desk. With trembling hands, he typed its name into a medical database. What he found made him sick to his stomach. The supplements weren't just unregulated, they were dangerous. Known side effects included severe gastrointestinal issues, hormonal imbalances, and in some cases, long-term fertility problems. He'd been poisoning his wife in the name of having a family. The irony would have been laughable if it wasn't so tragic. As rain began to fall outside his office window, Tristan picked up his phone. He scrolled past Xavier's messages, past his mother's constant inquiries about grandchildren, past the fertility clinic's follow-up appointment reminder. He stopped at Dr. Matthew's number. I'd like to schedule that counseling session, he said quietly. Just don't tell my wife yet. I need to figure some things out first. Across town, in her hotel room preparing for her presentation, Thais opened her laptop to find an email from an anonymous source. Attached were documents detailing the true nature of the supplements she'd been given and Xavier Bartlett's connection to the company that produced them. The truth was, there in black and white. Her husband might not have known he was hurting her, but someone had known exactly what they were doing. Thunder rolled across the city as two people who loved each other faced the hardest question of all. How do you find your way back to someone when the path you're on leads in opposite directions? The answer would come, but not before things got much, much worse. In her hotel room, Thais reached for her phone, then stopped. Some revelations needed to be delivered in person. Some betrayals cut too deep for text messages and voicemails. In his office, Tristan looked at the city lights blurring through the rain-streaked windows. He thought of Thais's words that morning. Sometimes we hurt people by trying to shape them into what we think they should be. He picked up the supplement bottle and dropped it in his trash can. It was a start, but he knew, deep in his heart, that some damage couldn't be undone with a single gesture. The storm outside intensified, matching the turbulence in their hearts. In different parts of the city, two people who had once promised to love each other forever faced the reality that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes it needs understanding, trust, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. The question was, would they find that courage before it was too late? Chapter 8. The Breaking Point. When Truth Shatters Everything. The medical report lay on Thais's hotel room desk like a loaded gun. Dr. River Harrison, a leading toxicologist at Boston General, had analyzed the supplements at her request. His findings were devastating. Compound contains unregulated hormonal disruptors. Potential long-term reproductive damage, banned in multiple countries, linked to corporate trials conducted by Bartlett Pharmaceuticals, 1985 to 1987. Her hands trembled as she read further. Trial terminated due to severe adverse effects. Product reformulated under subsidiary company. Current distribution status, illegal in U.S. markets. A knock at her door made her jump. Madison stood there, concern etched on her face. I came as soon as I got your message. What's going on? Thais wordlessly handed her the report. As Madison read, her face went from concern to horrified. Oh my God. Does Tristan know about this? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Thais turned to her laptop, where dozens of documents were open. Financial records, corporate emails, trial data. Xavier Bartlett has been pushing these supplements through shell companies for years. The question is, how much did Tristan know? Meanwhile, across town, Tristan sat in Dr. Matthews' office, alone this time. The fertility specialist listened gravely as he explained about the supplements. Mr. Stubbs, she said finally, these compounds can cause severe reproductive damage. Your wife needs immediate medical attention. I didn't know, he whispered, his voice breaking. Xavier said they were natural supplements, the same ones his wife used. Mr. Stubbs, Dr. Matthews leaned forward. Xavier Bartlett's wife died during pregnancy complications 20 years ago. The official cause was never released, but there were rumors about experimental fertility treatments. The revelation hit Tristan like a physical blow. His phone buzzed, another message from Xavier. Meeting tonight. Critical discussion about your future with the company. In the Bartlett Industries executive suite, Xavier stood at his window, watching the city below. His assistant, Jasper Cole, entered quietly. The lab confirmed Mrs. Stubbs stopped taking the supplements months ago, Jasper reported. But the initial damage might be enough, Xavier finished, a strange smile playing on his lips. Sometimes we must break things to rebuild them properly. Tristan has potential, but he's too soft. This will either make him or break him. And if it breaks them both? Xavier's smile didn't waver. Then they were never strong enough for what I have planned. Back in her hotel room, Thais received an encrypted email from an unexpected source. Jasper Cole had sent her years of internal documents, proof of Xavier's systematic manipulation of promising executives through their personal lives. "Your husband isn't the first," Jasper wrote, "but he could be the last, if you're brave enough." Madison read over her shoulder, her face pale. "This is bigger than just you and Tristan. This is systematic abuse of power. This is destruction of lives," Thais corrected, opening another file. "Look at these cases. Broken marriages, health complications, mysterious miscarriages, all leading to promoting whoever survived the chaos." Her phone lit up with a text from Tristan. "We need to talk. Please come home." At the brownstone, Tristan paced their living room. The home that had once represented their dreams now felt like a beautiful prison. Photos of their happiness mocked him from every wall. His mother had called earlier, her voice dripping with familiar disappointment. "Darling, I just had lunch with Xavier. He's concerned about your commitment to the company's values." The doorbell rang. Instead of Thais, he found Kingston on his doorstep, looking grave. "You need to see this," his friend said, pulling out his phone. "Someone leaked documents about Bartlett's executive development program. It's all over the financial news." The screen showed headlines: "Bartlett Industries under investigation for illegal medical trials," and "Corporate culture of destruction, the price of success at Bartlett Industries." Tristan's world tilted on its axis. "I need to find Thais." But Thais was already moving. With Madison's help, she'd contacted Dr. Harrison and arranged for comprehensive medical testing. The preliminary results were concerning enough that he'd fast-tracked her case. "The good news, Doctor," Harrison explained in his office, "is that you stopped taking the supplements before permanent damage occurred. The bad news is that continued exposure could have been catastrophic. Could we still have children?" The question surprised Thais as much as everyone else. "With proper treatment and time, yes. But Mrs. Stubbs, that's not the most pressing concern right now. These compounds are still in your system, and we need to start detoxification immediately." As nurses drew blood and attached monitors, Thais finally let herself cry. Madison held her hand, whispering, "You're the strongest person I know. We'll get through this." Across the city, Tristan walked into Xavier's office for the last time. His mentor sat behind his massive desk, seemingly unperturbed by the chaos erupting around him. "Ah, Tristan, ready to discuss your promotion." "Why?" Tristan's voice was raw. "Why would you do this?" Xavier's smile was cold. "To make you stronger. Your generation is soft, expecting everything without sacrifice. I gave you a choice, your ambition or your marriage. The fact that you're here means you've made it." "I didn't choose anything," Tristan said quietly. "You poisoned my wife. I gave you the tools. You chose to use them." The truth of those words hit harder than any physical blow. Tristan had chosen every time he brought home those supplements, every time he prioritized Xavier's approval over Thais's well-being. His phone buzzed with a message from Madison. "Thais is in the hospital, emergency detox treatment. She needs you, if you're still the man she married." The choice crystallized with perfect clarity. "You're right about one thing," Tristan said, placing his resignation letter on Xavier's desk. "I did make a choice. I'm choosing to be the man my wife deserves, not the monster you tried to create." Xavier's mask slipped for a moment, showing something ugly beneath. "You're throwing away everything we built." "No," Tristan replied. "I'm saving the only thing that matters." As he turned to leave, Xavier called out, "The board won't let this scandal touch me. I'm too valuable." Tristan paused at the door. "Maybe, but I have something you'll never have. Someone who loved me for who I am, not what I could become. And if I haven't lost her completely, that's worth more than everything you're offering." The hospital corridors seemed endless as Tristan ran toward the toxicology unit. He found Thais surrounded by machines, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her. Madison stood guard like an avenging angel. "You have 2 minutes," she warned. "Make them count." Thais's eyes opened as he approached. For a moment, neither spoke. "I didn't know," he finally whispered. "But that's no excuse. I should have asked, should have checked, should have protected you instead of trying to control you." "We both lost our way," Thais replied softly. "The question is, can we find our way back?" Before he could answer, alarms started blaring. Dr. Harrison rushed in, shouting orders as Thais's vitals crashed. The last thing Tristan heard before security ushered him out was Thais whispering, "I need time." In the waiting room, as doctors fought to stabilize his wife, Tristan faced the hardest truth of all. Sometimes love means letting go enough to let healing begin. Outside, rain fell on a city in turmoil as headlines about Bartlett Industries multiplied. But in a hospital room, the only headline that mattered was the one not yet written. Whether two hearts could find their way back from betrayal to trust, from broken to healing, from lost to found. The monitors stabilized, but the path ahead remained uncertain. Sometimes the hardest part of love is knowing when to fight and when to wait, when to speak and when to listen, when to hold on and when to let go, just enough for healing to begin. For Tristan and Thais, that journey was just beginning. Chapter 9. The Aftermath. When Truth Sets You Free. The private room in Boston General's toxicology unit became Thais's world for the next 3 weeks. Monitors beeped in steady rhythm, tracking her body's slow recovery from the poison that had been meant to help her conceive. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Dr. River Harrison led a team of specialists through her case, which had become both a medical priority and a legal battleground. The morning rounds always brought a crowd. Doctors, lawyers, and federal investigators, all circling the epicenter of what the media had dubbed the Bartlett fertility scandal. "Your blood work is improving," Dr. Harrison explained, reviewing her latest results. "But the hormonal damage will take longer to reverse. We're seeing similar patterns in other victims coming forward." Other victims. The words hung heavy in the room. Thais had learned there were dozens, wives of ambitious executives, all given the same supplements, all suffering similar complications. Some had lost their ability to have children entirely. Others had experienced worse fates. Madison had taken up residence in a chair by Thais's bed, running interference with visitors and managing the growing media interest. Her publishing background proved invaluable as they crafted statements and protected Thais's privacy. "The New York Times wants an exclusive," Madison said one morning, scrolling through emails. "They're calling you a whistleblower, a hero." "I don't feel like a hero," Thais whispered, watching rain trace patterns on her window. "I feel like someone who didn't ask enough questions." Tristan wasn't allowed in the room. Thais's doctor had been clear about minimizing stress during her recovery. But every morning, without fail, a fresh magnolia appeared on her windowsill. The nurses wouldn't say who left them, but Thais knew it was their flower, the one from their wedding. Her grandmother Magnolia arrived from New Orleans like a force of nature, bringing strength and home-cooked remedies that somehow made it past hospital regulations. "Baby girl," she said, settling into the chair beside Thais's bed. "Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is admit when we need help healing." The healing wasn't just physical. Dr. Lauren, a trauma specialist, visited daily to help Thais process the betrayal, not just from the supplements, but from the gradual erosion of trust in her marriage. "It's okay to love someone and still be angry with them," Dr. Gale assured her during one session. "It's okay to miss who they were while being afraid of who they became." Meanwhile, Tristan was fighting his own battles. The FBI's corporate fraud division had set up camp in his lawyer's office, combing through years of Bartlett Industries documents. His testimony would be crucial in bringing down Xavier's empire of destruction. "Mr. Stubbs," Special Agent Diana Martinez leaned forward across the conference table, "we need to understand the exact nature of your relationship with Xavier Bartlett. When did the grooming begin?" Grooming. The word made him sick, but as Tristan recounted years of subtle manipulation, of praise mixed with pressure, of suggestions that became demands, a pattern emerged. Xavier hadn't just been building a corporate empire, he'd been creating an army of men in his own image, broken and breaking others in turn. Kingston proved to be an unexpected ally, using his tech contacts to help trace the supplement supply chain. "The shell companies lead back to a research facility in Eastern Europe," he reported. "They were using American executives' families as unwitting test subjects." The media circus intensified as more victims came forward. Headlines screamed, "Bartlett Industries, corporate success built on broken families," and fertility scandal claims new victims daily. Xavier remained untouchable behind his wall of lawyers, but his empire was crumbling. Major shareholders were jumping ship, and the board called an emergency meeting to discuss his future. In her hospital room, Thais received an unexpected visitor. Jasper Cole, Xavier's former assistant, came bearing a thick folder. "These are all the records," he said quietly. "Everything Xavier did, everyone he hurt. I should have come forward sooner, but—" He trailed off. "Fear is a powerful weapon," Thais finished for him. He knew how to use it. The documents revealed a pattern spanning decades. Xavier had been recreating his own tragedy, the loss of his wife to experimental fertility treatments, in some twisted attempt to test other men's ambition against their love. He called it purification through sacrifice, Jasper explained. He believed real leaders had to be willing to sacrifice everything personal for professional success. As Thais read through the files, a new emotion began to replace her anger: determination. With Madison's help, she began writing, turning her economist's eye to the pattern of destruction. The result was an exposé that would shake corporate America to its core. 3 weeks into her hospital stay, Dr. Harrison delivered unexpected news. "The treatments are working better than anticipated," he said, reviewing her latest tests. "With continued care, you should make a full recovery, including—" He paused meaningfully. "Your reproductive system." Thais absorbed this information in silence. The possibility of children, the very thing that had started this nightmare, now felt like a distant concern compared to the fundamental questions of trust and healing. That evening, as sunset painted her room in shades of gold, Thais asked Madison to deliver a message. "Tell Tristan I'm ready to talk." He arrived as night was falling, looking both familiar and strange. The ambitious executive was gone, replaced by someone who seemed both older and younger, more like the boy she'd fallen in love with, but with eyes that had seen too much. "Hi," he said simply, standing uncertainly at the door. "Hi," she replied, and gestured to the chair beside her bed. They sat in silence for a moment, 4 years of marriage and a lifetime of dreams between them. "I've been in therapy," Tristan finally said, "learning about patterns of control, about how ambition can become poison, about how we hurt the people we love by trying to shape them into our vision of perfect." Thais nodded. "I've been learning too, about how sometimes we let people hurt us because we're afraid of disappointing them, about how silence can be as dangerous as lies." "I read your article draft," he admitted. "Madison showed me it's powerful." "It's not just our story anymore," Thais said softly. "It's about every couple who lost their way because someone else decided to play God with their lives." The monitors beeped steadily in the background as they talked, really talked, for the first time in months. about dreams and fears, about trust and forgiveness, about the difference between letting go and giving up. "I don't know if we can fix this," Thais finally said, her voice thick with tears, "but I know we have to try. Not just for us, but for everyone else who needs to see that healing is possible." Tristan reached for her hand, then stopped himself. "May I?" The question, the respect for her boundaries, meant more than any grand gesture could have. Thais nodded and their fingers intertwined. Outside her window, the city lights twinkled like stars. Somewhere in those lights, Xavier Bartlett was watching his empire crumble. But in this quiet room, something else was beginning to rebuild, slowly, carefully, one truth at a time. The path ahead would be long and uncertain. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal overnight. But as they sat together in the growing darkness, both understood that some things are worth fighting for. Not the perfect life they'd imagined, but the real one they might still create together. Dr. Harrison's final words from his evening rounds echoed in both their minds. Healing isn't linear. Some days you'll move forward, others back. The key is to keep moving, keep trying, keep believing in the possibility of better. In the soft beeping of monitors and the gentle fall of night, two people who had lost their way began the long journey of finding it again, together, but differently this time, with eyes wide open and hearts ready to learn. Chapter 10. Rising from Ashes, the Path to Healing. 1 month after the scandal broke, the grand jury convened in the federal courthouse downtown. The marble halls echoed with footsteps as victims and witnesses arrived to testify about Xavier Bartlett's decades of manipulation. Thais, finally released from the hospital but still recovering, sat in the witness preparation room with Special Agent Martinez. "The difference between your case and the others," Martinez explained, reviewing her notes, "is the documentation. Your economic background helped you trace the pattern that everyone else missed. You didn't just expose one incident, you unveiled an entire system." The evidence was damning. Thais's analysis had revealed a horrifying pattern. Every major promotion at Bartlett Industries had been preceded by a family crisis, usually involving fertility issues or pregnancy complications. The supplements were just one piece of a larger puzzle. In another part of the building, Tristan prepared for his own testimony. Kingston sat with him, providing moral support as they waited. "You know what's crazy?" Tristan said quietly. "Part of me still wants his approval. Even after everything, there's this voice in my head, wondering if I'm disappointing him." "That's how abuse works," responded Dr. Nathan Walsh, the trauma specialist who had been counseling Tristan. "It creates dependency even as it destroys. Your recognition of that pattern is already a sign of healing." The courthouse cafeteria became an unlikely place of connection as victims and their families began sharing stories. Rosalinda Ford, wife of a former vice president, had lost twins after taking the supplements. Michael Rodriguez's wife was still in treatment for liver damage. Each story added another piece to the puzzle of Xavier's manipulation. Back at the brownstone, now feeling both familiar and strange, Thais and Tristan were learning to navigate their new reality. They had converted the would-be nursery into a healing space. Part yoga studio, part library, part sanctuary. The pressure to have children had been replaced by the more fundamental need to rebuild trust. Their therapy sessions with Dr. Lauren Gale were intense but productive. "Tell me about the moment you first felt something was wrong," Dr. Gale prompted during a joint session. "It wasn't one moment," Thais reflected. "It was like watching a photo fade in the sun, so gradual you barely notice until one day the picture is unrecognizable." Tristan nodded. "I kept telling myself it was for our future, for our family. But really, I was just afraid of failing Xavier, failing my father's expectations, failing at being the man I thought I needed to be. The healing wasn't linear. Some days brought progress, like when Tristan testified against Xavier, his voice never wavering as he detailed years of manipulation. Other days brought setbacks, like when Thais found an old bottle of supplements hidden in a drawer and had a panic attack. Madison had become their bridge, helping them communicate when direct conversation felt too raw. She was also instrumental in helping Thais prepare her story for publication. "This isn't just an exposé," Madison said, reviewing the manuscript. "It's a warning, a wake-up call to corporate America about the human cost of unchecked ambition." The article, titled "The Price of Power, Corporate Culture, and the Destruction of Families," was set to be published in The Atlantic. It would detail not just the Bartlett scandal, but the larger pattern of corporate culture that valued profit over people. Magnolia made frequent trips from New Orleans, bringing her wisdom and healing energy. One evening, as they sat in the kitchen, she shared a revelation. "You know why Xavier's plan ultimately failed?" she asked, stirring a pot of her famous gumbo. "Because he understood power, but not strength. Real strength isn't about what you're willing to sacrifice, it's about what you're willing to protect." The legal proceedings moved forward, albeit slowly. Xavier's legal team fought every charge, but the evidence was overwhelming. More victims came forward daily, each story adding weight to the prosecution's case. Jasper Cole's testimony proved particularly damaging. He provided records of Xavier's personal journal entries, revealing a mindset twisted by his own tragedy. "After my wife died," one entry read, "I understood that true leaders must be forged in fire. Every man must choose between love and legacy. Those who choose love are weak. Those who survive the choice become worthy." The media circus intensified as the story grew. Headlines now focused not just on Bartlett Industries, but on toxic corporate culture nationwide. Other companies began reviewing their executive development programs, afraid of similar scandals. Through it all, Thais and Tristan's relationship evolved. The pretense of perfection had been stripped away, leaving something more real, if more fragile, in its place. "I miss us," Tristan admitted one night as they sat in their bay window watching the city lights. "But I don't miss who we were pretending to be." Thais understood. The couple who had tried so hard to fit someone else's definition of success had been replaced by two people learning to define success for themselves. Their healing journey inspired others. Support groups formed among the victims' families, creating a network of understanding and recovery. Thais's economic expertise helped many navigate the financial aftermath of medical bills and career changes. One unexpected afternoon, Dr. Harrison called with news that would change everything again. "Mrs. Stubbs," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "your latest tests show something unexpected. Would you and your husband be able to come in tomorrow morning?" The word hung unspoken between them as they drove to the hospital the next day. Pregnancy. Against all odds, despite everything, life had found a way to surprise them. But that news would have to wait. Because as they pulled into the hospital parking lot, Thais's phone exploded with notifications. Xavier Bartlett had called an emergency press conference. "I will not be made a scapegoat for common corporate practices," his statement began. "And I have evidence that will show exactly who orchestrated this witch hunt." The threat was clear. Xavier was planning one final attack, and he was aiming directly at them. In the hospital elevator, Thais and Tristan held hands, both thinking about the test results waiting upstairs and the storm gathering around them. "Whatever happens," Tristan said softly, "we face it together this time. No more secrets, no more trying to control the narrative." Thais squeezed his hand. "Together," she agreed. "But this time, we do it our way." As the elevator doors opened to the medical floor, both knew they were heading toward two life-changing revelations. One that could give them everything they'd once thought they wanted, and one that could cost them everything they'd rebuilt. The question was, were they strong enough to handle both? Chapter 11. Unexpected Blessings. When Life Surprises. Dr. Harrison's office felt different this time, less clinical somehow. Thais sat rigid in her chair, Tristan's hand clasped tightly in hers as they waited for the doctor to speak. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting everything in a surreal golden glow. "The tests are conclusive, Doctor," Harrison began, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Mrs. Stubbs, you're pregnant, approximately 8 weeks along, and despite everything your body has been through, both you and the baby appear to be healthy." The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. After everything, the supplements, the manipulation, the damage, this felt like a miracle they hadn't dared to hope for. "But how?" Thais whispered. "After all the damage from the supplements?" Dr. Harrison spread several test results on his desk. "Sometimes the body has remarkable healing capabilities. The detox treatments worked better than we anticipated, and it seems that once the toxins were cleared from your system, your body began to repair itself. However," his expression grew serious, "this will be a high-risk pregnancy. We'll need to monitor you very carefully." Tristan's hand trembled in Thais's grip. "Is it safe? For both of them?" "With proper medical care and monitoring, yes. But," Dr. Harrison emphasized, "stress must be absolutely minimal." Which brings me to the other matter at hand, Xavier Bartlett's press conference. The mention of Xavier's name shattered their moment of joy. On the television mounted in the corner of the office, news channels were already speculating about his upcoming announcement. "He's threatening to reveal something," Thais said quietly. "Something he thinks will destroy our credibility." Dr. Harrison's expression hardened. "Whatever he's planning, it cannot be allowed to affect your health. Not now." They left the hospital in a daze, their joy tempered by anxiety. Madison was waiting in the lobby, her face tight with concern. "Xavier's people have been calling every media contact I have," she reported. "They're pushing some narrative about corporate espionage, claiming you two orchestrated this whole thing to take over the company." Tristan's phone buzzed. A message from Kingston. "Emergency meeting at the lawyer's office. They found something in Xavier's records, something big." In the sleek offices of Palmer and Associates, their legal team had assembled a war room. Evidence boards covered the walls, and dozens of folders were spread across the conference table. "We found his weakness," announced Rachel Palmer, their lead attorney. "Xavier made one crucial mistake. He kept journals, detailed ones, and thanks to Jasper Cole, we have them all." The journals revealed a pattern darker than anyone had imagined. Xavier hadn't just been testing executives, he'd been recreating his own tragedy over and over, trying to prove that every man would make the same choice he had made 20 years ago. "He let his wife die," Rachel explained, her voice tight. "She was part of the original trial. When complications arose, the doctors wanted to terminate the trial to save her life. Xavier refused. He chose the company over her survival." The revelation hit Tristan like a physical blow. He's been trying to force everyone to make the same choice, to prove he wasn't wrong. Special Agent Martinez entered the room, bringing more news. "We've tracked the money. The supplements weren't just experiments, they were part of a larger drug trial. Xavier was using executives' families as unwitting test subjects for a new fertility drug Bartlett Pharmaceuticals was developing." Thais felt sick. Their personal tragedy had been nothing but data points in a clinical trial. Back at the brownstone, they tried to process everything while dealing with their own news. The room they'd converted into a healing space now held new possibility. We don't have to decide anything right now, Tristan said softly, watching Thais rest her hand on her still flat stomach. Whatever you want to do, I support you completely. Thais turned to him, tears in her eyes. That's all I ever wanted, for it to be my choice, our choice, not something forced on us by others' expectations. Their moment was interrupted by Magnolia's arrival. One look at their faces and she knew something had changed. Lord have mercy, she whispered, pulling them both into a fierce hug. A baby? After everything? It's early, Thais cautioned, and risky, and with Xavier's threats. That man has taken enough from this family, Magnolia declared. He will not take this joy too. But Xavier's threat loomed larger by the hour. His press conference was scheduled for the following morning, and the media was in a frenzy of speculation. That night, as they lay in bed, Thais voiced her deepest fear. What if we're being selfish, bringing a baby into all this chaos? Tristan propped himself up on one elbow, looking at her intently. Do you remember what you said in your article? About how the greatest act of rebellion against toxic power is choosing love? She nodded. Maybe this baby isn't just a surprise. Maybe it's a reminder that life goes on, that love wins, that all his attempts to destroy families only created stronger ones. A call from Jasper Cole interrupted their conversation. Xavier's evidence, he said without preamble. I know what it is. He's going to claim the supplements were your idea, Tristan. He has documents, forged but convincing, showing you requested them specifically for Thais. The pieces clicked into place. Xavier's final move was to paint Tristan as the mastermind, to claim he had been trying to stop the abuse rather than orchestrate it. He's trying to turn us against each other, Thais realized. One last attempt to prove that ambition is stronger than love. Their phones buzzed simultaneously, news alerts showing Xavier entering Bartlett Industries for what would be his last night as CEO. The photo showed him smiling, confident, certain of his victory. He doesn't know about the baby, Tristan said suddenly. He doesn't know that despite everything he did to prevent it, life found a way. Thais sat up, her face set with determination. Then maybe it's time he learned that some things are beyond his control. They stayed up late into the night, planning with their legal team, preparing for whatever Xavier might throw at them. But in quiet moments, their hands would find their way to Thais's stomach, marveling at the miracle growing there. Madison arrived early the next morning, bringing news crews and supporters. Victims' families had gathered outside Bartlett Industries, holding signs and sharing stories. As they prepared to face Xavier's press conference, Dr. Harrison called with a reminder, "Remember, Mrs. Stubbs, minimal stress. This baby is a fighter, but let's not push our luck." Thais squared her shoulders, one hand protectively over her stomach, the other firmly gripped in Tristan's. "Some fights are worth the risk," she replied. They stepped out into the morning sun, ready to face whatever came next. Behind them, Magnolia's voice rose in prayer. Madison coordinated with their legal team, and Kingston managed the growing crowd of supporters. Xavier's press conference would begin in 1 hour, but this time they weren't facing him as victims. They were facing him as survivors, as partners, as parents-to-be, and this time they had something he could never understand. The strength that comes not from destroying love, but from protecting it. The stage was set for the final confrontation. The question wasn't just about winning or losing anymore. It was about what kind of world they wanted their child to inherit. Chapter 12. The Final Stand, Truth's Triumph. The Bartlett Industries headquarters gleamed in the morning sun like a sword aimed at the sky. Media trucks crowded the plaza, their satellite dishes reaching upward like metal flowers. The crowd of supporters, victims, and journalists had swelled to hundreds. Inside the executive suite, Xavier Bartlett performed his final preparations with the precision of a man who had orchestrated countless destructions. His evidence, carefully forged documents showing Tristan's supposed masterminding of the supplement scheme, lay ready on his desk. "Everything is in place," Jasper Cole reported, his hidden recording device capturing every word. "The media is assembled in the main conference room." Xavier smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Time to end this little rebellion. Bring up the files showing Tristan's requests for the supplements." "Actually," a new voice cut in, "those won't be necessary." Special Agent Martinez stepped out of the private elevator, flanked by FBI agents. Behind them came Rachel Palmer, holding a stack of files that made Xavier's face go slack. "Looking for these?" Rachel held up his personal journals. "The originals make for fascinating reading, especially the entries about your wife." Outside the building, Thais and Tristan arrived to find Madison orchestrating their support network with military precision. Dr. Harrison had insisted on being present, monitoring Thais's stress levels throughout what promised to be an intense morning. "Remember," he cautioned, checking her vitals one last time. "The first sign of distress, and we pull you out, no arguments." Magnolia stood beside them like a guardian angel, her hand firmly gripping her granddaughter's shoulder. "Baby girl," she whispered, "your daddy would be so proud today." The main conference room had been transformed into an arena. Television cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking like watching eyes. The victims and their families sat in solidarity, a united front against corporate corruption. Xavier's entrance was calculated for maximum effect, the wounded CEO, ready to defend his legacy. But he faltered slightly at the sight of federal agents positioned at every exit. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the practiced charm that had destroyed so many lives, "I've called this conference to reveal the truth about the recent accusations against Bartlett Industries." He lifted the remote to start his presentation, but nothing happened. The screens remained dark. "Technical difficulties," Kingston's voice carried from the back of the room, where he stood by the AV controls. "Or maybe we should show what's really on those drives." The screens flickered to life, but instead of Xavier's carefully crafted narrative, they displayed his personal journal entries. 20 years of manipulation, carefully documented by his own hand. "Rosalinda's pregnancy complications progressing as expected," Thais read aloud, her voice strong. "Michael Rodriguez's wife showing optimal reaction to treatment, tracking all results for Phase 3 trials." Xavier's mask cracked. "Those are private like the medical records you accessed?" Tristan stepped forward. "Private like the lives you destroyed, or private like the fact that you let your own wife die to protect company profits?" The revelation rippled through the room. Cameras swung between Xavier's face and the damning evidence on the screens. "You don't understand," Xavier snarled, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. "Leadership requires sacrifice. I gave everything for this company." "No," Thais cut in, one hand protectively over her stomach. "You took everything from others to fill the void in yourself. But guess what? Despite everything you did to prevent it, life finds a way to heal." She stepped forward, Tristan at her side. "Your supplements were supposed to make conception impossible without causing obvious damage, a perfect way to test a man's loyalty. Would he choose his wife's health or his career? But you failed." "What are you talking about?" Xavier's eyes narrowed. "I'm pregnant," Thais announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Despite your best efforts to prevent it. Your perfect plan to recreate your own tragedy failed." The room erupted. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Xavier's face showed something none of them had ever seen before. Fear. "Impossible," he whispered. "The formulation was perfect." "Actually," Dr. Harrison stepped forward, "your formulation had a critical flaw. The human body's capacity for healing, when supported by love and proper care, is stronger than any poison. Special Agent Martinez moved in. Xavier Bartlett, you're under arrest for multiple counts of conspiracy, corporate fraud, and criminal medical experimentation. As federal agents led Xavier away, he locked eyes with Tristan one last time. You could have been great, he said softly. You could have been me. Thank God I chose to be myself instead, Tristan replied, his arm around Thais. The aftermath was a blur of statements, interviews, and testimonies. The victims' families surrounded Thais and Tristan, sharing tears and hugs. Rosalinda, Michael Rodriguez's wife, and others who had suffered under Xavier's manipulation found healing in the truth finally being revealed. Later that evening, in the quiet of their brownstone, Tristan and Thais sat in their bay window, watching the city lights twinkle. News channels were still running the story, but they had turned off their phones, choosing this moment of peace. Are you ready for what comes next? Tristan asked softly, his hand resting on her stomach. You mean the baby or rebuilding the company? Thais smiled. Both. Everything. The board had asked Tristan to take over as CEO with a mandate to transform Bartlett Industries' corporate culture. Thais's economic expertise would be crucial in restructuring the company to prioritize human welfare over profit. I'm ready if you are, she said, then laughed. Actually, that's not true. I'm terrified. But I'm ready to be terrified together, Magnolia's voice called from the kitchen where she was preparing a celebration dinner. Fear is just nature's way of telling you something important is about to happen. Madison appeared with a stack of newspapers, all featuring the day's events. The New York Times is calling it the end of toxic corporate culture. The Wall Street Journal went with Love Conquers Corporate Greed. Kingston joined them, bringing champagne for most and sparkling cider for Thais. To new beginnings, he proposed. To healing, Madison added. To family, Magnolia called from the kitchen. To love, Thais and Tristan said together, their hands intertwined. Outside, the city continued its eternal dance of light and shadow, but inside their home, a new chapter was beginning. One built not on the destruction of others, but on the strength of healing, the power of truth, and the endless capacity of love to transform even the deepest wounds into opportunities for growth. Dr. Harrison had been right. Healing wasn't linear. But as they sat surrounded by their chosen family, with a miracle growing despite all odds, they understood something Xavier never could. True strength isn't found in what you're willing to destroy, but in what you're willing to protect, nurture, and love. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of promise. Just like the city lights below, it twinkled with possibility, each point of light representing a new chance to get things right. Chapter 13. A New Beginning, When Love Heals. The transformation of Bartlett Industries began on a Monday morning in spring. Tristan stood in the lobby watching employees file in past the newly installed mission statement. Success through integrity, growth through humanity. The glass walls that had once reflected Xavier's vision of power now let in natural light, illuminating the changes taking place within. 4 months after Xavier's arrest, the company was undergoing more than just a corporate restructuring. It was experiencing a rebirth. The Wellness Center opens next week, Madison reported, now heading the company's newly created Employee Advocacy Department. Dr. Gale has already scheduled counseling sessions for former victims and their families. The former executive suite had been converted into a community space, complete with daycare facilities and a medical clinic. The infamous conference room where Xavier had made his last stand was now a support group meeting area. Thais, her baby bump now visible beneath elegant maternity wear, led the Economic Impact Committee, Her first initiative had been to establish a victims' compensation fund, ensuring that every family affected by Xavier's schemes received not just financial support, but comprehensive healthcare and counseling. "We're not just rebuilding a company," she explained to the board of directors. "We're creating a model for corporate responsibility in the modern age." The media had dubbed it the Restoration, and business schools were already writing case studies about the transformation. But for those involved, it was deeply personal. Rosalinda Ford, now heading the company's new medical ethics division, had transformed her tragedy into purpose. "Every policy we create," she declared during a staff meeting, "must answer one question: are we protecting our people?" In their brownstone, now filled with both baby preparations and company documents, Thais and Tristan maintained their own careful balance of personal and professional healing. "The nursery colors are perfect, Doctor," Harrison commented during a home checkup, admiring the warm yellows and soft greens. "Much better for stress levels than corporate grays." The pregnancy had progressed beautifully, defying all initial concerns. Their baby, a girl according to recent scans, was strong and healthy, a living testament to the body's capacity for healing. "Have you thought about names?" Madison asked one evening during their weekly dinner gathering. Thais and Tristan exchanged a look. "We're thinking of calling her Hope," Thais revealed, "because that's what she represents. Not just for us, but for everyone affected by this story." The healing extended beyond their immediate circle. Kingston had developed a whistleblower protection program that was being adopted by companies nationwide. "We're creating safe spaces for truth," he explained. "No more silent suffering." Jasper Cole, having turned state's evidence, now worked with corporate watchdog groups, using his insider knowledge to identify and prevent similar abuses. The legal proceedings against Xavier continued, but he no longer held power over their lives. His attempt to recreate his personal tragedy had instead sparked a revolution in corporate culture. One particularly meaningful change came in the form of the Bartlett Industries Family Protection Act, a corporate policy that would soon become federal law. It mandated transparent medical policies, banned unauthorized medical testing, and established clear boundaries between personal and professional life. "Xavier's legacy," Tristan remarked during a press conference, "will be the exact opposite of what he intended. Instead of proving that power requires sacrifice, he proved that true strength comes from protecting what matters most." Magnolia, who had extended her stay to help prepare for the baby, often found them working late into the night, not from pressure, but from passion for the changes they were creating. "You two are building something beautiful from something broken," she observed. "That's what real love does." The transformation wasn't without its challenges. Some old guard executives resisted the changes, clinging to Xavier's philosophy of success at any cost. But the tide of change was irreversible. "We lost 3 major clients this quarter," a board member complained during a tense meeting, "and gained 6 new ones who specifically chose us for our ethical standards," Thais countered, sharing data that showed increased productivity, decreased turnover, and improving market position. Their story had sparked a national conversation about corporate culture and family values. Other companies began reviewing their policies, and a movement for ethical business practices gained momentum. One evening, as they prepared for a charity gala benefiting corporate abuse survivors, Tristan found Thais in their bedroom, studying their wedding photo. "Do you ever miss who we were then?" he asked softly. She turned to him, one hand resting on her growing belly. "I miss our innocence sometimes, but I love who we've become, not despite our scars, but because of how we've healed them." The gala itself was a celebration of transformation. Victims and survivors shared stories, not just of trauma, but of healing and hope. Michael Rodriguez's wife announced a support network for affected families. Rosalinda Ford unveiled research into detecting corporate medical abuse. From this day forward, Tristan announced to the gathered crowd, Bartlett Industries will be measured not by its profit margins, but by its positive impact on human lives. Late that night, in their quiet kitchen, Thais felt their daughter kick as Magnolia prepared her famous midnight beignets. "She's going to be a fighter," Magnolia smiled, dusting powdered sugar over the hot pastries. "Just like her mama." "And compassionate like her daddy," Thais added, watching Tristan review applications for the Victims Fund, ensuring every family received the support they needed. The nursery, once a source of conflict, had become a symbol of their healed relationship. One wall featured a mural of magnolia flowers, another displayed framed photos of their extended family, not just blood relatives, but all the people who had supported their journey. Dr. Harrison's latest checkup had brought happy tears. "This baby is thriving. Your body has completely healed from the damage. Sometimes love really is the best medicine." As midnight approached, Thais and Tristan stood in what had once been Xavier's office, now transformed into a memorial garden for corporate abuse survivors. The city lights twinkled below, but the darkness no longer held any threats. "We did it," Thais whispered, leaning into Tristan's embrace. "We turned his weapon into our strength." "No," Tristan corrected gently. "You did it. You showed me that real success isn't measured in power over others, but in the power to help others heal." Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more reforms to implement, more families to help, more changes to navigate. But tonight, in this peaceful moment, they had everything they never knew they wanted. Not the perfect life Xavier had promised, but something far more precious. A real one, built on love, truth, and the courage to heal. Hope kicked again, as if adding her agreement. The future they were building wasn't just for them anymore. It was for her, and for every child, who would grow up in a world where corporate success and human dignity weren't opposing forces. The magnolia flowers in the garden caught the moonlight, their white petals glowing like stars brought down to earth. Above them, the real stars twinkled, witnesses to a transformation that had begun with one couple's courage to choose love over power, healing over harm, and truth over success at any cost. Chapter 14. Sweet Revenge. The Triumph of Living Well. 2 years after Xavier Bartlett's arrest, the annual Bartlett Industries Christmas Gala looked nothing like its predecessors. Gone were the cold corporate aesthetics and power plays. Instead, the grand ballroom of the Restoration Center, formerly Bartlett Tower, radiated warmth and genuine celebration. Thais Rossington Stubbs stood at the podium, her daughter Hope nestled in one arm, while she addressed the crowd. At 18 months old, Hope was the living embodiment of their triumph, a bright-eyed, curly-haired miracle with her mother's determination and her father's gentle smile. 2 years ago, I stood in this room a different woman, Thais began, her voice carrying to every corner. I was broken, betrayed, and believed my dreams of motherhood had been stolen from me. Tonight, I stand here not just as a survivor, but as a testament to the most powerful revenge of all, living well. The crowd, filled with fellow survivors, corporate leaders, and family members, listened intently as she continued. To every woman who has been betrayed, every person who has been made to feel small, every dream that's been crushed by someone else's cruelty, this story is for you. Our victory isn't just about corporate reform or legal justice. It's about reclaiming our power to define our own happiness. Behind her, scenes from the past 2 years played on massive screens. The opening of the Survivors Healing Center, the passage of the Corporate Family Protection Act, the establishment of the Hope Foundation for Survivors. Countless stories of healing and triumph. Madison Brooks, now a best-selling author after publishing Corporate Hearts, The Human Cost of Power, stood with tears in her eyes. Her book had become required reading in business schools nationwide, changing how future leaders viewed success. Rosalinda, whose lost twins had sparked her journey to becoming the country's leading advocate for medical ethics in corporate settings, held up her newborn daughter, conceived naturally after doctors said it would be impossible. Michael Rodriguez's wife, Lisa, now ran the country's largest support network for corporate abuse survivors. Her program had helped thousands of families rebuild their lives. Tristan stepped up to join his wife at the podium, taking hope into his arms. "The greatest lesson we learned," he added, "was that true strength isn't found in power over others, but in the power to rise above those who tried to break us." The transformation of Bartlett Industries had become a Harvard Business School case study in corporate rehabilitation. Under their joint leadership, the company had not only survived but thrived, proving that ethical business practices and profitability could coexist. But the real triumph was personal. "To those who feel broken by betrayal," Thais continued, her voice strong with emotion, "know this: your worth is not determined by those who failed to see it. Your future is not limited by those who tried to control it. And your happiness is the sweetest revenge against those who thought they could destroy you." She shared the lessons they'd learned. 1. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Don't let anyone gaslight you into doubting your own truth. 2. Surround yourself with people who support your healing, not those who demand your forgiveness before you're ready. 3. Success isn't about proving your worth to those who hurt you. It's about proving your worth to yourself. 4. Your timeline is your own. Don't let anyone rush your healing or define your milestones. 5. The best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building a life so beautiful that they can't help but watch from the sidelines. Xavier Bartlett, serving 20 years in federal prison, had indeed watched from the sidelines as everything he'd built was transformed into its opposite. His legacy wasn't one of power and control, but a cautionary tale that had sparked a revolution in corporate culture. The event's highlight came when Thais unveiled the Magnolia Initiative, named after her grandmother, who had passed away peacefully 6 months earlier. The program would provide full support for survivors of corporate abuse, medical care, legal aid, career rehabilitation, and most importantly, a community of understanding. "My grandmother always said that real strength isn't in staying unbroken," Thais shared, tears in her eyes, "but in how we put ourselves back together. Sometimes we heal stronger, the broken places." Hope chose that moment to reach for the microphone, causing laughter to ripple through the crowd. Her innocent joy was the perfect testament to their message. Life finds a way to bloom even in the aftermath of storms. As the evening wound down, survivors and their families shared stories of healing and hope. Each tale was unique, but they shared a common thread: the discovery that the end of one dream often leads to the beginning of a better one. In a quiet moment, Tristan found Thais in their old office, now a meditation room for employees. "Do you ever regret how things turned out?" he asked softly. She looked at their daughter, playing with Madison's twins in the corner, then back at him. "How can I regret anything that led us here? We didn't just survive, we rewrote the story." The night ended with a tradition they'd started, releasing paper lanterns into the sky, each one carrying a message of hope from a survivor. The sight was breathtaking, hundreds of lights ascending into the darkness, each representing a person who had chosen to rise above their pain. "Remember," Thais concluded in her final address, "the greatest power you have is the power to choose your own path. Your betrayal is a chapter in your story, not the end of it. Your pain is valid, but it's not your destiny. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to let someone else's cruelty define your future. The crowd rose in a standing ovation, but Thais wasn't finished. She had one final message. To every woman who has been betrayed, every heart that has been broken, every dream that has been deferred, you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become. And that choice, that's your superpower. Use it wisely. Use it well. Use it to build a life so magnificent that your happiness becomes your revenge. Hope toddled over to her mother, arms raised in a universal request to be held. As Thais lifted her daughter, she saw in the child's eyes the same spark that had gotten her through her darkest days, that unshakable belief that tomorrow could be better than today. The city lights twinkled below, but they no longer seemed cold or distant. Instead, they were like stars brought down to earth, each one representing a possibility, a future, a dream waiting to be reclaimed. This was their revenge, not in destruction, but in creation, not in hatred, but in healing, not in looking back with regret, but in moving forward with purpose. And as the last paper lantern disappeared into the night sky, its light joining the stars above, they knew that this wasn't just their story anymore. It belonged to every person who needed to believe that after betrayal, after loss, after pain, there was still hope. There was still love. There was still the possibility of a happiness so complete that it made every tear worth crying, every battle worth fighting, and every step of the journey worth taking. Because in the end, the sweetest revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting better. It's about getting stronger. It's about getting happier. And most importantly, it's about getting free. The end.